Hello interwebs and welcome to an incredibly impromptu review of the recently released movie Antebellum. And I say impromptu review because one, I actually had no intention of reviewing this movie on my channel, and two, I actually just finished watching the movie about 30 minutes ago. So you may be asking yourself, why are you coming on camera right now and reviewing the movie? Well, that's because I honestly wanted to process this movie on camera with all of you because I have no script. I have no actual specific notes right now that I usually have when coming into this movie. But having finished this movie, it left me feeling incredibly uncomfortable. And not because of the movie itself, but I felt uncomfortable because of the conversation that this movie started making me have between the movie itself, my feelings on the movie, and then the overall critical reception of this movie, which has been largely negative surrounding this film, and something that I had actually was aware of before I stepped into the film. And I kind of want to process it and discuss that conversation that I'm having in my head and between all of these different things out here on camera in front of you. And I'm going to talk about all that stuff here. So the conversation surrounding this movie, and I'm going to full spoiler this movie, so if you haven't seen Antebellum, either go see it, or if you don't care about getting spoilers, I'm going to go full into it. But the conversation surrounding this movie is that, and the negative response to this movie, I should say, one of the larger criticisms is that this movie glorifies slavery and glorifies the pre-war / Civil War South, the antebellum, it's in the name, the antebellum South. And when we say glorifies, we're not saying like, oh, look, it's not saying like, this is great, like something like Gone with the Wind did. Gone with the Wind was a film that very much actively, positively tried to portray the South, whether it was like aware, it was saying some things about slavery, but that was a film that was very much saying like, look how beautiful the South was and how, how sad it is that we've lost that, without really acknowledging the horrors of slavery. But most people seem to agree that this film does tend to say, like, look, slavery was awful. But that's where they say that this movie stops, that it looks at slavery very voyeuristically. When I say voyeuristically, voyeurism means that we enjoy looking at something. We find a special enjoyment in watching something. And not in the sense that's like, ooh, I like that. Even be feeling uncomfortable or not liking, or like watching something that makes you feel icky can still be voyeuristic if you still find some sense of like desire to look at something fascinating and interesting to you. That's something like horror films are. Horror films are very voyeuristic. We don't necessarily like looking at horror or violence in our brains. Like we wouldn't say like we enjoy violence, but we do like to voyeur, to look at, to watch these things because it fascinates us. And in a lot of ways, that's what the critical response to this film is saying that this film is glorifying what slavery was, saying that it's like having us look at it and say like, ooh, look how horrible that was. Isn't that fascinating to look at? And a lot of that criticism is coming from the Black community. A lot of Black critics of this film, and I'm not saying all of them, I don't want to lump everyone in a group, especially like a racial group, a minority group, but a lot of that criticism is coming from the Black community. And so that's something that when I heard that, I wanted to be very, very acutely aware of as I watched the film, because I am not a Black person, quite obviously, and so I may not be as sensitive or aware of when something glorifies something horrible and is not adequately critiquing something like slavery well. And this is something that I'm aware of when it comes to like trans stuff. Like some people may not be aware of when something hurts or offends the trans community, but that I am acutely attuned to because I am trans. And so I may notice some things or be more acutely aware of when something is not adequately critiquing how trans people are treated or the horrors that trans people face well enough. And so hearing that criticism made me want to make sure I was extra careful to look at this film through that eye. Which leads me to the reason that I wanted to process this film on camera, because when I watched the film, I actually found myself liking it and liking what this film was trying to say. Because, spoiler alert, the message of the film or the twist of the film is that this woman, the main character, Janelle Monáe's character, actually is supposedly living on a slavery plantation in the South, and you think it's in the past, but then the movie cuts to an earlier point in her life, but an earlier point in life in the modern day. And there's some like little hints to show that this was earlier in her life, like little references and things like that. But Janelle Monáe is still playing the same character. So you're wondering, like, is this time travel? Did she somehow travel back to the antebellum South? And how horrible would it be for modern-day black women to live in the South? Kind of like Octavia Butler's Kindred, which is one of my favorite movies or favorite books, I should say, of all time. Octavia Butler wrote this book called Kindred, which was about a black woman from the then present day when Octavia Butler wrote the book, being forcibly taken back in time to live in the South. So I was wondering if it would sort of be a similar time travel kind of scenario with like a horror tinge. But the twist of the film actually is that all of this takes place in the modern day, and that everything that you've seen is actually a Civil War reenactment group made at like a park, kind of like a Westworld style park, but they kidnap black people in order to have them be slaves. And the overall message of the film, to me, seems like, especially at the end of the film when Janelle Monáe breaks out of this Civil War reenactment and actually breaks into a theme park, and you see like gawkers on at the end of the film coming to enjoy like a Civil War battle reenactment that so many of us have seen happen many times, whether we've gone to enjoy it or not. But we've seen Civil War reenactments all the time, and so these people coming in don't realize that they are complicit, or trying to hide the fact that all this beauty and all of this intrigue and this sort of mythologizing of the Civil War is built on the backs of the horrors of slavery. And the movie tells that story with a brick. Like Council of Geeks did a wonderful review and said that, this was a brick movie. It's telling its message with a brick. But it's using this brick to say this message of the fact that so many in America, especially white people in America, try to glorify the past without acknowledging the horrors that past is built on. We want to glorify the heritage of the South, for example, or the heritage of America, glossing over indigenous people. America comes in and we held all these great values, but it came at the expense of indigenous people, and this movie is explicitly stating it came on the backs of the horrific treatment of black people in slavery and in America. All that myth of America was built on these horrible things, but we ignore that, and because we ignore that, we make ourselves complicit in allowing people who do realize that history, the people who actually want to enjoy bringing people back to the slavery days, the Civil War reenactors who enact these horrible things on Janelle Monáe's character in the film, we allow them to continue their things because we don't want to acknowledge that they understand the full horrors of this and actually enjoy it and revel in it. We just want to see the myth, but the people who understand the myth even deeper actually want the horrors to come back because it allowed them to have power. And we are all complicit in that if we don't acknowledge that fact, if we just let this to be hidden deeper in the park as it is in Antebellum. And that's a very brick message. But I kind of liked it. I thought that this movie said that message well, even if it was beating you over the head with it. And so that left me profoundly uncomfortable getting out of this movie, because here I was being like, I liked the film. I thought it had a message that was fairly topical for today, that, it's saying something about today that many in America are not willing to acknowledge the past, the horrors of the past, and in doing so enable people who want to bring those horrors back. And that is a very topical message that we can get into the politics of another time, but I want to kind of analyze my own stuff here because I feel like I'm a white person, and I am saying I like this film. And so I look at the response from a lot of people of color who say that this film is glorifying slavery. And so I'm trying to analyze that issue, reconcile that in my brain. And I wanted to do that on camera because too often white people, like myself, I try and talk on this channel often about race because I feel like too often we feel uncomfortable. White people feel uncomfortable having these conversations because we feel like we'll get something wrong, we'll screw up. But I feel like if I do that, then I am doing what this movie is saying. It's letting others control the conversation. who have no compunction about talking about race and will say horrible things about race. And I don't want to leave it to people of color to be the ones to fight that battle continuously. But I also know that I am a white person, and I'm going to miss things because of that. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make mistakes because of that. And so this was a moment where I was trying to analyze that and analyze my own reaction, be like, am I missing something because I am white? And I think, thinking about it, I think there was a few things in this film that this film missed that I would not have realized had I not tried to listen to the critical reception against this film. One, this movie starts off very traumatizingly to black people. There are many scenes in the opening of this film which are incredibly, incredibly traumatic to watch. I'm not even a black person. I was repulsed, as I should be, by these treatments. I mean, we're all human regardless of our skin color, so me just being an empathetic person, I was repulsed by the acts of this film, but I was realizing because that this wasn't happening to my community. As a trans person, for example, I was able to distance myself from that trauma a little bit. And so I sit here and think, like, if I was a person of color who had all of this history and trauma coming from the world right now, there's so much happening for people of color, black people specifically in America and around the world right now. It's in the news. Check out. If you haven't heard, there's stuff happening. And so seeing a movie like this right now has got to feel like it's compounding on that and just showing it when you didn't really need to necessarily get across this brick of a message. And I think the other problem, too, is that this film doesn't have any nuance. I referenced earlier the book Kindred by Octavia Butler. And what is beautiful about that book is it is not just a torture porn scenario where I forget the main character's name in that book, but the main character of that book does not go back in time and just experience the horrors of the South. She doesn't go back in time and just she has to deal with slavery. No, the plot revolves around the fact that she learns that one of her ancestors was the master of the slave plantation that she is going back to. And she is coming back in time every time that master's life is in danger. So she has to save this white person's life, this white person who enslaved her ancestors and, raped her ancestors for her to be born. And so she is intrinsically linked with the life of the master of this slave plantation. And she also comes to like him in a way, but also knows that he is complicit and he is brainwashed by the South as a kid. And then she sees him grow up because she comes back at different points in his life to, again, continue that system. And yet she still loves him in a way. He's also still part of her family tree. And so there's this nuance, this blurring of the lines of the morality of slavery. Yes, slavery is wrong and horrific and completely and totally wrong on its face, but it was never just as simple as, these people are good or these people are bad. It was a system perpetuating itself and a system that gets taught to people, and those people then continue it. And to just say bad, good, is overly diminutive. And I cannot say this as well as Octavia Butler did. Octavia Butler is one of the preeminent writers of our time. In fact, I'm going to put up a quote and recite a quote that I remember from it, but I'll say it in the past. I'll put it up here that I think kind of shows the nuance and it sort of elucidates this theme that Octavia Butler talks about right here. Strangely, they seemed to like him, hold him in contempt, and fear him all at the same time. This confused me because I felt just about the same mixture of emotions for him myself. I had thought my feelings were complicated because he and I had such a strange relationship, but then slavery of any kind fostered strange relationships. Only the overseer drew simple, unconflicting emotions of hatred and fear when he appeared briefly, but then it was part of the overseer's job to be hated and feared, while the master kept his hands clean. So as you can see, Octavia Butler did this brilliant job of showing the nuances of slavery, and this film, Antebellum, does not do that. It's very clear, just torture porn in a lot of areas. And it does have a message that I think it is important to say, but it doesn't, and it says it with a brick, and sometimes you need a brick in order to say the message. But I also understand that for people that this movie was made to teach white people. I think that's the thing. This movie was made to say, hey, white people, you should understand this, and beat you over the head with it. It was made for people who, like, of my skin color, to get the message. And in many ways, it's got to be frustrating and annoying and tick people off, especially in the Black community, that this message even still needs to be said. So that's sort of me processing it. And like I said, I don't think I have the full... I probably am not touching upon everything that is in this conversation. I am also sure that I have missed things because I am... number one, watching this film reviewing this film and doing this video so closely after watching the film, but I kind of wanted to do this processing on camera specifically for the reason to showcase how to process it. I don't know. There's a lot here, and I know I'm going to miss things, but I wanted to have this conversation on camera. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should be more careful and precise with my message, but I am curious. But I don't know. I feel like we need to show this processing more. But again, maybe it's me being a white person who is making that mistake. This film caused me a lot of emotions, not just because of the film itself, but because of the conversation around the film, and caused me to question my own reactions to films like this. Actually, this is the last note that I think I'll end on because I'm just making an interesting connection right now in my brain. But, you know, I spoke a lot about with the recent announcement that there's going to be transgender characters joining the Star Trek franchise. And I talked about how excited I was about that because previously there had been some trans representation in Star Trek, but those trans representations in Star Trek were meant to teach others about trans people. They were like morality tales about trans people and queer people, meant to say, like, isn't this bad how queer people are treated? And yes, that is a wonderful message. And those are important messages for some people to hear, but they are not a message for me as a trans person. They are messages for someone else. They are messages to teach someone else about me. And while that is nice and appreciated, I also like to be part of stories that don't glorify the horrific treatment of me and who I am and my identity all the time. And we're just at the place for trans people, like in Star Trek, where we're getting to just be part of stories. And yes, there can be some elements of teaching about trans lives through that, but I also just like trans people getting to exist in a story because we're part of that beautiful tapestry of humanity. And we're just getting that place for trans people. And honestly, this is a conversation that has been happening for so long for Black people, for people of color, that we should be well beyond this point by now, but we're not, as clear by this movie, this film, this country. And so it's got to be so annoying and angering to see a film with an actress like Janelle Monáe teaching a lesson to people teaching a lesson with a brick and beating you over the head with it, and the people who should be getting that brick lobbed at their face just not even recognizing that they were hit with it, or not even being aware that there's a brick being lobbied at them and don't even feel it when it hits them, sort of thing. The metaphor is falling apart. I may be relying on it too much, but you get what I'm saying? Like, we should be well beyond this conversation, and we're not, and that's got to be frustrating, and it's got to also feel very like, oh God, you have to tell this message in such a blunt, gross, disgusting, voyeuristic way in order for some people to get it. And even then, some people won't. That's sort of my processing thoughts on Antebellum. Maybe my thoughts on it will change hearing your comments. I would love to hear what you think down below of your thoughts on this movie. I would also love to... I'm going to be doing my own research and trying to learn more and trying to listen to as many voices as possible about this film. Let me know what you think about Antebellum. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want more discussions like this, and Star Trek stuff, and sci-fi stuff, and discussions of politics and social issues through geek topics. And also have a Patreon if you want to support me. But that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Stephen Clinard, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Jemshin, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, Wellington Marcus, John Steele, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Jason Knott, Maeve, Subraxis, Tonya Trummer, Wen Dizzlebizzle, Gretchen Badger, Dante St. James, Polly Mina, Piston Twisted Garage, and Bree Beecher. Thank you all so much for your continued support.